What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Horror Movie Monday here on the Corvo Riot Show. I am joined today by Geddy Cahoon, and we are going to chat it up about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the first film, as well as the various sequels, reboots, remakes, retcons, and every other thing in between that has come since the original. Let's just face it, that was a film that should have stood on its own. It should not have been attempted to be turned into a franchise. Then again, you'd say that about a lot of horror movies, and a lot of horror movies kind of suffered the same fate. You got an original, the first film in the series, that's usually heralded in high regard and thought of fondly, and then you have the sequels, which people have mixed feelings about, or just they either love them or they hate them, and that seems to be a trend in a lot of horror movie franchises. So so sit back, relax, turn down the lights, and enjoy. It's myself and Geddy Cahoon chatting it up about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It is another edition of Horror Movie Monday here on the Corvo Riot Show. I am joined today by Geddy Cahoon, and we're going to dive into the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Cool.
On today's show. So, Geddy, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, man, thanks for having me. I love, talking about horror movies and stuff that I like and stuff that I don't like, so cool.
Texas Chainsaw, that was more of a recent watch for you?
Yeah, so, I'm a big, horror person my whole life, always, super into horror, but, I started really getting into, horror movies around, freshman year of high school, 14, 15, but I never saw Texas Chainsaw, the very first one, for the first time until, I want to say, 2018, so, 4 years ago or so. It was just one of those things that, you have certain movies that even though they're, iconic, famous movies, you just don't watch them for whatever reason. And I just randomly one night I watched it and I was like, oh, why did I wait so long to watch this? Because it's literally the best horror movie ever. It's the best. It's so good.
It is such a perfect movie. I remember the first time I watched it, just feeling it feels so real.
Yeah. Yeah, there's especially for being a slasher, if you really want to consider it a slasher, it has just this authentic vibe to it where it really does. It sometimes feels like you're really watching a snuff film, or even if it doesn't evoke that, it feels like the killers in the movie, these could be real people that are out there. If you went far enough into East Bumblefuck of whatever state, even if it's not specifically Texas, you would find some fucked up crazy people that are doing horrible shit like this. It's a very it's something that's easy to conceive happening to you. It's not that much of a stretch to picture yourself in that same situation. And I think that's what strengthens it. And that's, being set mostly in the daytime. It doesn't rely on a lot of the typical things that you would think of in a horror movie. There's no dark jump scares. There's no nothing like that. So it's just damn, you could really end up encountering some crazy hillbillies like this that want to, fuck you up.
Yeah. Especially out towards the Pine Barrens and shit here in Jersey. Anybody who's those of us who have traveled on those back roads and shit, it's okay, yeah, I could see some fucking weirdos creeping around back here and weird shit happening.
Especially it's one of those things. If you look at when I was a kid, I said I was real into horror. As a kid, I read a lot of horror, and I still do. But I was very into horror books and short stories, and I would read weird. You said Pine Barrens. I would read Weird New Jersey. I had all those Weird New Jersey compendiums, and they always have those legends of the melon heads or the backwoods people, and that's kind of what Texas Chainsaw Massacre is. It's when you stray off the path, there's just weird shit waiting for you, and it's just not always good to go looking for those things. And sometimes they find you even when you're not looking for them.
Yeah, definitely. The other thing I noticed with Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it feels like you're watching a bloodbath, but it's not a bloodbath at all. one of the least violent films of that nature.
Yeah, it's like and that's like one of the things that's so great about it. Like it's a very it's a very like cerebral movie, right? Like it kind of leaves a lot to your imagination. Like you said, there's not really much blood. There's like a couple scenes that have blood, but it's not some. You hear the title Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and it's not some gore fest. It's not like not like the new, which I'm sure we'll get to that, but that new one that they just made, the new sequel, whatever the fuck it is, prequel, whatever pile of shit. Spoiler for how I feel about that. But that movie was like excessively gory to the point of being like gratuitous, which is fine. Like I like movies like that, but it's like the original is not like that at all. It's every death is kind of shown and cut in a way where the worst part of it is like left to your imagination. And I think in horror in general, I personally think like that's the strongest way to execute horror of any kind. You have to show a little bit, but then you have to let people use their imagination, whether it's a book, a movie, a comic, a video game, because your imagination is going to come up with something scarier and freakier than what somebody else can literally show you. And I think the movie like really plays into that. And I'm sure like the fact that they were working with a budget of like $5 and some pocket lint probably helped towards that.
Yeah.
How can we creatively film these scenes without spending a lot of money on fucking a million props and fake blood and different wardrobes and shit. So it was like, but yeah, I think like that's one of the coolest parts of the movie is that it's really a movie that like forces you to think and visualize for yourself like the horrible shit that's happening, but you get such a perfect picture of it, but you still have to go that little extra mile yourself, and it makes it creepier. It makes it more disturbing.
Yeah, the element, like all the violence happens behind closed doors.
Yeah, pretty much.
You see the prelude to the violence, but the violence itself, the horrible things happen essentially behind closed doors, and it leaves it up to you as a viewer to like what is going on back there, and our minds always tend to go to the worst possible things
right.
we could think of, so it makes it so much more effective in that way.
And they're really careful to, even with like the movie kind of reveals without ever coming right out and saying it, like that they're cooking people in like the barbecue stand. Like the movie does a really good job, like kind of like letting that like gnaw at the back of your head. Like when they're eating the barbecue in the beginning, and then at the end you realize like, oh, they were like eating parts of people. And there's like that one scene when Sally runs into the barbecue stand before she realizes that the cook is like associated with the family, and there's like this cut to like meat cooking in the fire, and it's like it's kind of like just vaguely awfully shaped enough that you realize with the character like, oh, like that's not like a pig that's roasting in there. And it's like it's just little like skeevy things like that kind of like makes your skin crawl, and like the movie has so much of that in it. And I think like that's what the movie is. It's like this gnawing dread.
Yeah, there's a lot of subtlety and just little detail hidden in the background, so to speak. It constantly keeps you in a state of like thinking about things, like what is going on.
It's so atmospheric, and it makes like the parts where like really intense shit happens like so much more potent. Like when somebody else that I know that loves the movie described it really well. Like that's one of those first scenes when Leatherface starts killing the kids, and he hits the guy with the hammer, and then when he pulls him into the room and he slams the door, just the way they block that and shoot it, it's like they made like just slamming a door like terrifying. Like it's just like something about his body language and just the audio and just the atmosphere up to that point. It's just like it's scary. Like just the act of like this metal door like sliding shut, like it's so ominous and like freaky. And the whole movie kind of has this sort of like, it almost in a way it feels like a post like apocalyptic film in some ways, like the area of Texas that they're in, they repeatedly enforce this idea that it's like industrialization, like a post-industrial collapse, and it's like this ruined area that used to be thriving, and it's all overgrown with like these weeds, and it's in like this sea of like flowers and like dusty grass and like, it's all abandoned, and you almost get, it's like the world ended, but like just their world.
Yeah, it's so detached and separated from like regular society. Yeah, it does feel like almost this,
like an alien planet.
Like a meteor finally, came down and took
It's
everything out, and it just left
like,
hillbillies.
It's right. Well, it's like when you see like a post-apocalyptic story where like, the mutants in a like irradiated world like resort to cannibalism, and it's like these people are like 5 steps ahead of everybody else because like their world already ended. When that factory closed down, they lost everything. Like that was their whole life. So there's like that element. There's that little like sort of like socio-political element of like, hey, capitalism might not be so great kind of thing, which I think like the movie does a good job incorporating that, but not like ramming it down your throat. Like you can enjoy the movie just on like the surface level without getting too much into all of that shit.
Yeah.
That's ideal.
Yeah, because I mean, so many horror movies, especially, seem to tread that socio-political, societal thing. What's going on in society, and there's ones that do it right, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, or even like Night of the Living Dead, the Romero movies.
Yeah,
that touch on it, but don't. It doesn't take up the whole story and
right.
take over, make you feel like you're watching something that's supposed to make you.
Yeah, a lot of modern horror, and I hate to be that guy that's like, well, it was better back in the old days, but a lot of modern horror is very like preachy. Like it seems more concerned with the message than like being entertaining, and it needs to be both, and it needs to be entertaining first.
Right.
Ideally, it needs to perfectly do either, so you can enjoy it on both levels, which is one other reason Texas Chainsaw is so great. But yeah, it's like watching a movie like that now, you're like, well, how come they could make this movie and perfectly nail like the tone and everything and have it be deep but simple at the same time? Like, why aren't all movies like this? It's easy, just make it good. Just make it good.
Yeah. You would think it would be a simple concept, but
you guys did it in the desert with $60,000, and
it's amazing when you look back at what's been done for so little, and then you look at some of the shit that's been done for so much, and it's like,
yeah,
oh, fuck.
It's I think it goes to show like it's a sort of, to make like a really good piece of art, there has to be like an element of not like an element of like unpretentiousness. Like you can't be convinced that what you're making is so great. And I think like in those conditions that they were working in, which were like completely inhumane, like horrible conditions to make a movie in,
yeah,
like, it was like guerrilla filmmaking to like the nth degree. Like they just needed to plow through and get it done. And it's like there's something to be said, I think, for torturing yourself a little bit to make your art better. And I think that Texas Chainsaw Massacre is like a great example of that. Like a little bit of self-harm sometimes can and suffering can make
I've watched some of the like documentaries, like behind the scenes stuff. There's a couple of them on like Tubi, I think. And it's incredible. They were basically surrounded by actual like dead animal carcasses and parts and the odors, and it was scarier being, I guess, on set than watching the movie.
Yeah, that's what I had. I remember reading something about that. The dinner scene. They said shoot the dinner scene. They said they were using just like real meat on the table, and they said it all spoiled in like the heat of the setting and under like the studio lights and stuff. So they said like that was just like they're all just inhaling like rotten meat fumes all day for like this 8-hour shoot.
Yeah, and the other thing about that was it even though the scene technically takes place at night, it was not nighttime. So they're in the middle of Texas with the sun beating down, and they've got the windows curtained off so that the light can't come through, and then the lamps and all the production lights and shit. And yeah, now you have just rotting animal flesh.
Yeah, I think
about.
I remember reading something that Gunnar Hansen, right, played Leatherface in that movie. That was the actor. I think I remember reading something where he said he had like a mild like psychotic break filming that scene, and there's like a part where he when Leatherface goes to grab Sally, and he said like for a second he like completely lost himself and like forgot what he was doing, and he really thought like, okay, I'm supposed to kill her. And he remembered after like a second, like, oh no, we're just making a movie. But he said he was like so like delirious, like the mental fog of those like filming that scene was, and I just think like that's hilarious. Like, and but again, like a little bit of that spirit is in the movie, and that's why the movie has such a palpable atmosphere of like just at any second things could go horribly wrong. Like,
yeah, the characters don't feel like they're acting like they're in uncomfortable situations. Like they genuinely come off like they're in these horribly uncomfortable situations, and that's because
they were.
So
I always love how the movie does a great job. That climactic chase scene before the dinner scene when Leatherface chases Sally, and I love the way they blocked that and shot it, and he is like on her ass the entire time. Like you get the vibe during that whole chase that if she's just like a split half a second too slow, he's on her. Or like if she just reached back as she's running, like she could touch him. Like that's how close he is to her as he's chasing her. And it's like such a good visual, this huge fucking freakish behemoth running like a lunatic. Like, and that's another thing like I love about Leatherface specifically, like, which obviously, you know, he kind of is one of the things that makes the movie. I mean, that's like an iconic character, but he's so great because he's not like that typical like slasher character. The way he moves, the way he acts, like everything about him is like so unique. And I love how there's like that manic energy to like everything he does. He's always like kind of like tweaking a little bit and like shaking and just like acting like like he's confused and like frazzled, and he's not like the stoic, like dead silent, you know, horror movie killer guy, which that type of character is cool. I don't have anything against that, but I think like that's just another thing that makes the character so special and the movie so good, is that again there's just like this kinetic energy to everything that happens, and then he's like a big part of that. He just has so much like energy, that character, and like, you know, even like the ending, I mean the ending of that movie is so good. It's just like this cavalcade of like insanity, like it's all the craziness that's been building up and it just turns into like this like circus show of just crazy, and just like him dancing with the chainsaw at the end. Like there's no other way that movie could have ended. It's just, it devolves into madness, which is like teetering on the edge the entire time, and then finally it just embraces him, and it's just the craziness of everything going on. It's so good.
Yeah.
So fun.
The character has a depth to it, but it's also it's like it's another one of those things that's left up to your imagination. Like there's obviously a backstory there and a reason for that character to be the way it is, but it's up to you to kind of put it together.
Yeah, and it's so well done. It's like, and again, this is another thing, you know, in a lot of modern media, modern like story narrative based, you know, media and stuff, that it's very like over, you know, people like a lot of information now. People like to know everything about a character's backstory, all these details, which is fine most of the time, but like sometimes there's a strength to just letting something be vague. Like you said, you can use your imagination to think like, well, why is he like this? He's obvious, you know, he's obviously supposed to be like mentally disabled, but like, why was he always like that? Is he deformed? Like you never see his face. You never like, you just get like a vague idea. There's this like fucked up family unit, and they were probably a little fucked up even before the whole world collapsed around them, and they just like devolved like further into.
Yeah, that didn't all just happen because a fucking meat factory shut down.
Probably. But I think that's like another great thing about the sort of dynamic of the characters in that movie. Like I like how Leatherface isn't really, he's not really like the main villain, really. Like I always kind of saw it as like, even though he has probably a little bit less screen time, I think altogether, I think I always kind of saw the hitchhiker as more of like the central antagonist of the story, because Leatherface is ultimately just listening to the two brothers. You know, he's like they're heavy kind of, like he's the one that's the most physically capable, but he's just reacting to everything. He's not seeking these people out. Like the hitchhiker is the one that hunts them down and like marks them to go to the place or whatever. And then Leatherface, everything he does is reactive to them, which I think is like really interesting. Like I just like the dynamic of, and they kind of kept that similar dynamic in the second one. You know, like in the second one, I feel like it's the same thing. I mean, they even created another brother character to be like the leader and like central antagonist. I just think I just always thought that was interesting. It's just a good dynamic between the villains.
Yeah, Leatherface was always more like almost a sidekick. He was just
Yeah,
there to do the dirty work.
yeah, and it's just interesting because it's again, it's just one of those things where the iconic killer is almost like a not like a side character because he's still like a focal character, but it's just again like his motivations and like why he acts the way he does. It's not like typical slasher movie stuff, which is just cool.
Right,
Really,
I think it plays into that depth of the character too, where he has a little bit of a sympathetic
yeah,
side to him because you are questioning like how did he get here? How did he get pulled into that? Like because he's not acting necessarily on his own.
yeah.
How did this end up coming to be? And is it not his fault? He's like this.
Yeah, well, you kind of even I feel like the movie you get that one scene. I think it's after he's killed like two or three of the kids, and it's like it's still daylight out, and there's that one scene where it's just the camera is just on him, and he's sitting in the room, and he's like
Yeah,
shaking back and forth, and he's kind of like rubbing his face and like talking to himself, and he's kind of just like tweaking out, and obviously you don't know what he's thinking or what he's trying to communicate in that moment, but I feel like that is supposed to make you there's like a sense of almost like panic to like his body language and like the vocalizations he's making. Like you almost get the sense that he's scared of the kids or something. You know what I mean? Like he's not like hunting them down one by one. He's like, oh my god, like something. This is just crazy. Like
he sees
I,
them as a threat.
or something. Yeah, it's just like a
Yeah,
weird, interesting thing. Like again, it's that it's how well something can come off when you just sort of set the pieces up and just let people think for themselves, use their own imagination. Because then any interpretation of it is not right or wrong. You can just choose to interpret it how you like. You can enjoy the movie if you think Leatherface is just some merciless psycho who wants to kill the kids, or you can enjoy it on a different level of like, well, did he feel threatened that they came into his home, like kind of thing, which I think there's a definite implication of that. But again, it can just be enjoyed easily on multiple levels. It's just so easy to either take it for what it is or try to go into that deeper level with it.
yeah. And I think it all works better when you don't know the whole backstory. And I think the films they made trying to explain that
Yeah.
are proof that not everything needs that backstory shit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one, which one is it? Is it 3D, the one that did the Halloween 2018 thing before Halloween 2018 was a thing? Like, isn't 3D the one that's like a direct sequel to the original?
Yeah, it's supposed to be.
And has like the old man, even though like the timeline doesn't add up at all because it clearly takes place in like modern times, but it's like it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, they just
But
couldn't
yeah,
make that work
that
apparently.
that scene at the beginning where like the townspeople come to like try to take Leatherface away, and you see like the whole family, and it's just really like an interesting idea that is like not executed well because it's like first of all they want you to like explicitly feel sympathy for this character, which I think is like he is like a murderous cannibal. So I think like explicitly putting that on the audience, like, no, you should feel bad. Like, no, leave it up to them to decide if they want to feel sympathetic toward. Like you were just saying about the first movie, there's like this sort of sympathetic air to him. Like there's like a pitiful sort of vibe to him that you could pick up on.
Yeah.
But as opposed to just flat out being like, no, you should feel bad for him. Like, well, no, I mean that's like stupid. It's just. And then I think that first remake. That got into the backstory a little bit, right? The 2003 one, that showed like that he was like deformed or something, right? I haven't seen that one in a while, but
It's
like,
been so long since I've watched
yeah,
that. Yeah. I mean, I know they made a prequel to it, which delved
yeah, well,
even further into that.
yeah. Well, it's like I think that in that one they show him without the mask, which I guess they just. And I can appreciate that they were trying to differentiate themselves from the original. I'm not going to sit here and be like, well, it should just be a shot-for-shot remake because that's then why even remake it. I mean, I like that remake. I don't think that's a bad movie. It's a fine
Out of all the remake stuff, especially, it's
it's easily the best. Yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, they kind of went with the idea that you see more of the family, and he's like deformed, and that's why he wears the masks. And it's just kind of like, when you spell it out that explicitly, it just loses a certain allure. Like you were saying, it's like, it's just better to kind of leave it up to the imagination. Like, why is he like this, as opposed to being like, well, he wears these human masks because he's deformed. And it's like, okay, well, now he's like any horror movie monster, any bad guy, any slasher. It's just,
yeah. And I mean, some of the backstory shit didn't work for some of the others either, so it's never been a
this franchise has a very like muddy sort of continuity. It's bad, like, and a lot of horror franchises are like that, I feel like. But yeah, with Texas Chainsaw, I mean, they've done the remake, the prequel to the remake. The original 3 movies, I feel like, are only like even loosely connected. Like I don't really feel. I don't know if you've seen the 3rd one.
I've seen the original 4. Yeah.
Like the 3rd one doesn't really feel connected to 2 or 1, and 2 barely feels connected to 1. And I love 2. I think 2 is awesome.
I think 2's a great movie. Yeah.
Really fucking. They went in the perfect opposite direction, because you were never gonna reach the heights of the first one. So go opposite and make like a cornball, like 80s fucking neon cartoon movie of craziness, and it's awesome. It's great. I mean, fucking Bill Moseley as Chop Top that's like an iconic character. Like, that's so good. I like Leatherface in the movie. I don't like his visual design as much, but I like the way they like portrayed him. Yeah, I think 2 is awesome. You can see a lot of House of a Thousand Corpses in 2, I think, as well. Like, that feels like very like influential on Rob Zombie when he made House, I feel like. But yeah.
It does feel kind of like a Rob Zombie movie, except the main character wasn't his wife. So,
well, when I first saw it, I was like, because again, House of a Thousand Corpses was like one of the first horror movies I ever watched. So then, years later, finally getting to Texas Chainsaw, I was like, oh shit, this is like so similar. It's like beat for beat, almost like the same in certain ways. Not in a bad way. It was just kind of cool to see, like, oh, like this is kind of what he was going for with House of a Thousand Corpses.
Right.
But yeah, like I feel like even those first 3 movies, I feel like are only like really loosely connected. Like they try to say that the second one is a direct sequel to 1, but it doesn't even feel like they take place in like the same universe. Like other than the main, it's weird, and I kind of appreciate that, like how they don't adhere themselves too strictly to some kind of like really.
You really don't need to see what came before.
Yeah, exactly.
To watch any of them, like.
And fine, and if you do see them all, that's great too. You can enjoy them on that level. But yeah, they all kind of stand alone. Like 2, I don't think you need to. I don't think you really. And those are probably the 2 most closely connected ones.
Yeah.
Because they directly reference 1 quite a bit, even though again, I feel like they don't really feel connected. But even then, you could watch 2 and not be like any more confused or less confused than you would have been having watched 1. It's not like you need to learn all this homework and lore to like really fun, which is, I mean, it's good. They're just simple, simple stories are fun. But yeah, I think like
they did get bad after 2 though.
Yeah, 3 is just so like, I don't know. I don't have really an opinion on it. Like, it's just fine. It's so like basic. It's such a basic, like, when did that come out? Like the early 90s or like really late 80s, probably 3, or maybe it was the mid 90s, probably the early 90s.
I'm going to say late 80s, early 90s. Yeah.
It feels so much like a textbook, just like generic, like 90s slasher, which is, for better or worse, like that's fine. Like there's really nothing like offensively bad about it. I don't think. I like Leatherface in it, kind of. I thought it was like another different way to portray him as more of like a straight up like slasher villain. Like, I don't hate it. And I like his visual design. I thought it was interesting. I mean, nothing tops the first movie. The outfit from the end of the first movie, when he puts the dinner outfit on, the Pretty Woman outfit, that is like, in terms of like a horror visual, like a design for a horror character, there's like nothing better. I think that's like the best horror movie like monster design ever. Like something about that, I just love it. And like none of the other movies in the franchise even touched that outfit from 1, or the design of Leatherface in 1 in general. But I think he still had interesting designs in some of the subsequent movies.
Yeah, part 3 was 1990 actually.
Oh,
So yeah, and then part 4, which is I think was essentially supposed to be a remake, reboot type thing.
With Matthew McConaughey, right?
Yeah, and Renee Zellweger.
That one I haven't seen. It's one of the only things I haven't seen that, and I haven't seen the prequel to the remake, The Beginning, I think it's called. Those are the only I haven't seen. Because that Next Generation with McConaughey, that for a long time that like wasn't streaming anywhere that I knew of, and I just never cared enough to go like find it on like DVD or some illegal site. But from what I've seen of it, it just seems like so fucking bizarre.
It's just completely fucking out there. Yeah. I mean, I've watched it once, and it was so completely absurd. It's like, and I think I was one of those movies too that like got shot and then sat on the fucking shelf for a while because like the studio didn't know what to fucking do with this footage. Which, if you watch the movie, I mean, I can imagine just seeing the rough footage and going, "What the fuck do we do with this?
What did we just fucking produce and pay for?"
Yeah, like how much did this film fucking cost us?
Doesn't it lean really heavily? I've read some stuff about it. It leans real heavily into like those elements of like mysticism and like conspiracy and like astrology that like the first movie kind of has like that really well executed undercurrent of like fate and like the cosmos and like astrology. Like they talk about it a little bit, and like there's little hints that like maybe there's like some small element of like black magic like at work in the world, but it's nothing like overbearing. But I've heard that Next Generation like fully leans into that, like, and doesn't look back. Like it's all like there's some weird government conspiracy or some shit. Like
I forget, but yeah, it's completely out there. It's not one you have to see for sure. Like it's completely inconsequential and has zero. I mean, it does not connect at all with the previous films, like in any shape.
What I've seen of it, it's like Leatherface doesn't even like wear the skin. Like he just wears like a latex like woman's suit, right? Which I will say like that's creepy. Like I think that's an interesting sort of choice to like visually redesign that character. But it's just so like batshit weird.
Yeah, I remember it leaning really heavy into like, I guess, the sexuality of Leatherface, like right. Because he always, like, even in the first one, there's the point where he's wearing the female face with the makeup and stuff like that. Like there was always like this weird, like he took on like a female role.
Yeah, there's the part in the first one when they get home and they have the hitchhike. He's like making dinner with like the grandma face on, and he has like the polka dotted apron.
Yeah.
And he's domestic like housewife, like making dinner for everybody. And it's like, yeah, there's like those weird little hints of like, but I always saw it in the first one as more like not even that it's supposed to be like a sort of a thing of like transvestitism or anything like that. It's just like he likes to just pretend like he's just playing house. Like,
yeah.
But I think it's unreasonable to explore like a sexual element to that. But I think dressing him up in a latex like woman suit is a weird way to go about that.
Yeah, I feel like with 4 though, they really did lean into that, like trying to make it more of a sexualized thing as opposed to just this thing of like, well, why does he do that?
Yeah.
You know?
Well, two kind of had that. There's that element where he likes the radio host chick, and there's that part where he like confronts her with the chainsaw, and he's like kind of like fucking her with the chainsaw, but like not really weird, like, which is it's a cool scene. It's a weird scene, but yeah, I guess like, you know, it's not the worst idea to go down that road, but it's one of those ones I have to watch eventually just for the insanity of it, you know. Like eventually I think it's on HBO Max right now, but
it could be, yeah,
our platform. So when I go and check,
it's probably the least known of the bunch for that. Like I feel like even on like home video and shit, it never really got that far.
I feel like I heard something about, you know, by the time it came out, you know, Matthew McConaughey and Renee Zellweger had become, you know, pretty famous, and I think they both kind of fought to have the movie buried because they were like ashamed of it. That bullshit.
I could see that, but I do remember that now. Yeah, because the whole reason the film even got released was because they could slap the names Matthew McConaughey and Renee Zellweger on it, which at that point had a lot more clout than it did when they shot it. So,
hey, they're the most famous actors in the world in this fucking shitty, dumb movie that we made.
It's a total shit show. Like I don't blame anybody for like maybe not wanting it to see the light of day.
You can see both sides of it, I guess.
Yeah, it's if you watch the movie, you'll probably understand more. Like, yeah, maybe not. Right after my career took off, do I want this?
Right.
But yeah, it's like a doomed franchise. It's like they keep trying to do shit with it, and at this point, it's like you're never gonna recreate the magic of the first one. Like, just stop.
Yeah, and it's like my thing is like, even if you want to continue it as a franchise, I think that's fine because it's a malleable idea, right? It's not something that is like so set in stone that you can only make it one way, which is evidenced by the fact that the second movie also fucking rules, and it's completely different from the first one. Yeah. So it's an idea that if you are, a talented and creative person, it can be made good. But something about it, for some reason, it just seems like a lot of like filmmakers and writers and stuff, maybe directors, just don't understand like how to handle the sort of atmosphere and the characters and stuff. Because I feel like everything after 2 kind of just makes them like generic slasher horror movies, and they just don't have the same. It's like you said, they don't even come close to like catching a whiff of the first one, but it's like they don't even like make any attempt to be like unique in their own ways. Like the first remake kind of did, I thought. I mean, it's still very bogged down in like the conventional like 2000s slasher horror shit, which I think there's a sort of like fondness for that type of movie. Like I don't hate that type of movie. There's like a guilty pleasure fun in it, which I think that's probably why that remake is decent. But like, yeah, it's just like, I was hoping the most recent one from earlier this year, I was hoping they would try to recapture that feeling of the first one, or at least attempt to put like a really, because there's a and not to go off on a tangent, but did you see like the newest Scream?
I have not. No, I have not seen anything really new. And God, I think the newest horror movie I watched was Halloween Kills, actually.
Oh, I got you. Okay, well, so in Scream, they talked about like the concept of how modern horror, what's in right now, is to be sort of cerebral and smarter, and they use the term elevated horror because horror is a lot more. I guess you would use the word like academic or intellectual now. Movies like Hereditary and stuff put sort of this idea that your movie can be an intelligent film and be scary, which I think is cool when it's done well. A lot of the time it's not. But, I thought like the new Texas Chainsaw could have been like an elevated horror film because the original it's an elevated horror movie before that concept existed. Right. It's a really fucking cerebral, smart, interesting movie that does a lot of really unique things, and I was like, great, so now we're in this era where everything is trying to be that, so maybe it'll at least try to be that, and it'll be decent. But I feel like it just tried to be the worst parts of Halloween 2018, which is already not a great movie in my opinion, and it was just that Texas Chainsaw from this year was a disaster. I did not like it at all. I had reasonable expectations going in, and it was just. So if the phone could feel my annoyance talking about the Texas Chainsaw 2022.
Yeah, apparently.
But yeah, I did not feel. I wasn't feeling it. I agree. I completely agree. Like doomed franchise, it just doesn't. Something about it. It just doesn't work. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, it seems like everything they tried to do after the remake was just never going to. Like even 3D was like, which is the last one that I actually saw.
3D had some good ideas, but I just think it was like the execution was just bad. It was just kind of clumsy. I think again, like visually, I don't like the way Leatherface looks in that movie. I think they had a good idea of like making him an old man because he should be an old man if it's a sequel to a movie that took place in 1975 or whatever. but it was just he's kind of uninteresting, and it's just that is a weird fucking movie. But I do think that movie gets some undue hate. I don't think it's as bad as people say it is, but it's definitely just like it's just a weird movie, and not like the good kind of weird. It's just all.
I remember going into it very apprehensive because I felt like, well, is this going to be just another one of those 3D movies where everything is so focused on the 3D that they pretty much forget they're actually making a fucking movie? You know, and it didn't. I think, with the exception of like a couple of things, like it really didn't utilize the 3D much, to the point that I walked out of it thinking, well, do I really need to spend the $30 a ticket to fucking see that in 3D?
That's what I was gonna say. You know, I didn't see it in theaters. I actually watched that for the first time recently on Netflix or whatever. But yeah, I don't remember like the 3D, and obviously you can't see 3D on a Netflix rip of it, but like, I don't remember the 3D shots and stuff feeling like particularly like prominent. It didn't seem like it really went that well very much at all. I feel like that was just one of those things where they slapped that name on there just because at the time that was what everybody was doing, even though it's barely even a 3D movie.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that really jumped out to me, no pun intended, was the scene where she's hiding in the casket and they took the shot of the chainsaw coming through.
Yeah.
That felt like about the only thing they did that they went, oh yeah, that's right, this thing's in 3D.
Yeah, right.
Like, everything else about it, it's just like, okay, it could have just been a regular 2D movie. There was zero need for the 3D thing at all.
Yeah, especially like in that franchise, which I don't know, but it's like, I always think that movie, that Texas Chainsaw 3D, like amuses me because, again, I feel like it did, Halloween 2018 created like this fucking fever pitch. Like, people loved that. It was a huge movie, and I feel like Texas Chainsaw 3D did that gimmick before it was even a thing, and it failed. And then Halloween 2018 became massively popular, and they made a whole franchise out of that. So then Texas Chainsaw, they try to revive it again, ripping off the gimmick that it already did like 10 years ago to try to like capture the Halloween 2018 and Halloween Kills like fanfare. It's just amusing to me. Like, it's like you said, just bad ideas in this franchise. Like, they're so desperate. Like, let's do something we already did that didn't work, because now it's like the hot thing to do, which is like, oh, a direct sequel to the first movie that ignores all the other movies. And it's like, just dumb.
It's Texas Chainsaw is proof that like not every iconic horror movie needs to be turned into multiple films, and like, it's perfectly acceptable to have a horror movie end and say, okay, like that's it.
Yeah.
That's the end of it.
Yeah, it's not every franchise can be fucking Friday the 13th, which those movies to a point get better as they go. I think there's a point where it drops off severely, but for whatever reason, that franchise and that character really lends itself to repeated installments and ramping it up in this through line of like continuity that is like weird, well executed,
well,
but
and people, you got to remember too, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, even though it gets lumped in with the slasher genre, the term slasher didn't really come around till 1980 with Jason. Even Michael Myers prior, the slasher genre in 78 hadn't really been created yet, and in 74 we were definitely like Texas Chainsaw was way before the whole slasher thing. So like, it doesn't work as a slasher franchise.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I always feel like when I describe it to people, like, not that I'm describing it to a ton of people that are unaware of it or haven't seen it, because it's a fucking extremely famous movie. But I always like you said, I always hesitate to even call it a slasher, because it's really not. Like, but then it kind of gets into that whole debate of like, well, what is a slasher? Is a slasher? Is any movie where a big guy kills people a slasher, or is it not? Like, what makes a slasher? Interesting discussion. I don't think Texas Chainsaw really fits. I agree. And then they tried to make it something that it wasn't, and it never was that. Yeah. It's just a horror movie. It's its own thing, and it's like, you can't put it in that box of like. And again, there's nothing wrong with it. I love fucking Friday the 13th. I think those are fucking fantastic movies. I think slashers are awesome when they're well done, and even sometimes when they're not. But you can't force something to be You can't force a movie to be something that it's not, and I just don't think that's
the best of the slasher movies. There's an organic nature about them.
Yeah.
That it wasn't. I'm trying to think of how to describe it. Like the filmmakers went out to just make a cheap horror film,
right,
and make the best thing they could.
Yeah.
But they weren't trying to make something that was out of their reach.
Right. There's like a simplicity to it,
It feels like the best ones feel like, oh, like I could make that with my cousin in our backyard. Like,
yeah. And I guess that's why it became such a prominent like subgenre, because it's like it's so simple and easy, and you can kind of just mix up the ingredients and make your guy with like a cool costume killing people, and then it's like it's a cheap movie you can make cheaply. And some filmmakers and stuff did really interesting stuff with it. Like I think I watched The Prowler recently, and that's a really good like unique slasher, and it doesn't really do anything crazy in terms of like the story or the structure, but it has like this weirdly like dreamy atmosphere. Like the whole movie just feels kind of like floaty and weird, and it's like you can make it unique in those little ways, and while sticking to like a format that's like easy to execute, which is like the beauty of it. But
there's a formulaic vibe to slashers,
right.
And Texas Chainsaw doesn't fit into the formula
at all really.
Yeah, even Halloween. Some of Halloween, I think, introduced some of the things that would become the formula, but it doesn't fit that exact. At least not the original. Doesn't fit that exact same.
I would agree.
Thing.
The first Halloween is very like, and again, I was just talking about atmospheric thriller or slasher. Not that a slasher can't be like an atmospheric movie, but Halloween is the first one is very much like an atmospheric, like creeping dread. And then, in the last 20 minutes, people start dying or whatever, however the timeline hacks out. But like, that movie it really succeeds more on like the aura and atmosphere that it creates, which similar to Texas Chainsaw. And it's like, in a lot of ways, you can't put it in the slasher box, even though it sort of created the box, right?
Yeah, it's that weird thing that came along before the thing was actually a thing, but it doesn't fit that exact mold, and like what became look at Halloween 2 as a prime example. Look at how drastically different the second one was from the first one, and that being it came along in a post Friday the 13th world.
Yeah, and I think that's also it's a great argument I think in defense of the tropes and feeling of a slasher like fucking template, and an argument against it if you're not into it, because it's like you said, it loses pretty much everything that made the first one special. It doesn't have that autumnal vibe of like kind of being a little cold on like an autumn night, and how it's kind of nice but kind of creepy, and there's like something just off in the air. That's not in 2 at all. 2 is like a bombastic fucking crazy shit show, which I love 2. I think 2 is fucking awesome, but it's a good, you can use it I think in defensive slashers and an argument against them, because it just goes to show that like you said, like you kind of take these movies that didn't start as one thing and turn them into something. And I think for even a franchise like Halloween, I don't think it always worked, because there's plenty of shitty fucking Halloween movies. It's not like they're all good.
They're not even close to being all good, and that's God, that clusterfuck. Whew.
That's a whole other fucking discussion. But I think it's like a similar thing to Texas Chainsaw, of like you start with this iconic, really unique film, and then they try to kind of mold the character into a different format, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I think Halloween has more hits than Texas Chainsaw, quite frankly, but it's just another thing of like something about that atmosphere and that setting just doesn't translate, and Halloween did.
There you have it, another Horror Movie Monday in the books. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, listening. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I did have to cut this episode short, similar to my episode from last Thursday for Burgundy. probably the last 20 or so minutes, unfortunately, there was no audio on Geddy's end. Despite there being zero indication when we were recording that there was any issue on his end with, as far as the recording goes, he had some internet connection issues, but I never actually lost him. So I'm not sure what the hell happened there, but I'm working on it, and I'm hoping to have that resolved so that, in the future, obviously, that's not an issue. Worst comes to worst, we get some new software and try something new. So no big deal overall. Hope you guys enjoyed this conversation. Had a blast recording it. Had a blast chatting with Geddy about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Again, great film. Terrible franchise. Cursed franchise, as we said in the episode. It is a cursed fucking franchise for sure, but the original, I mean, you can't even deny the original is a masterpiece. It is a classic. If that movie doesn't scare you, quite frankly, if that movie doesn't scare you, your brain's not functioning properly or something. It's the only thing I could think of. So, follow the show on Twitter and actually follow me on Twitter and Instagram at CorvoGNF on Twitter, at Corvo Riot 138 on Instagram. Follow the show on Instagram at The Corvo Riot Show, and head over to Facebook and find the Corvo Riot Show page on Facebook, and be sure to like and follow that. Head over to my YouTube channel, Corvo Riot on YouTube, and be sure to subscribe. All the episodes of the podcast go up on there. I'm working currently on some sound bites and clips to also put up on there, and probably some other different types of content at some point in the future. So be sure to check that out. Thank you guys so much for listening. Be sure to come back Thursday for my interview with MFPW wrestler Christian Rocco. Great conversation. That almost turned into a Horror Movie Monday. So if you're into these Horror Movie Mondays, drop in and check that one out a little bit. There's some discussion in there you'll probably enjoy. Again, thank you guys so much for listening. It means the world to me. And be sure to come back on Thursday for my conversation with Christian Rocco. Until then, sign off.
Now allow me to reintroduce myself. They call me J.O. N to the easy E-N. Know that we undefeated. Y'all are beneath them speeches trying to air a grievance. But his lines are overhead. Better check the air for clearance. Call the tower. This is ours. Clear the heat. The air apparent. Really, I've never been better. Legacy, this is forever. All the more times I've been severed. I'm raising the bar. You can go ahead and measure. Think about time for a toast.